am joined today by Ron Garan, whom I had the pleasure of meeting recently at one of my retreats on the East Coast. Ron is a former NASA astronaut who spent, I believe, 178 days in space across two missions to the International Space Station. And what brings us together today is something that we have each arrived at from very different directions. A recognition of the fundamental oneness of existence. I have come to this understanding through the great contemplative traditions, in particular the Vedantic and Sufi traditions, and Ron has arrived at essentially the same recognition through the rather more dramatic experience of leaving the planet and looking back at Earth from the moon. Frank Wright referred to this as the overview effect, and Ron, I believe you refer to it as the orbital perspective. And your account is one of the most compelling accounts I know of how a shift in perspective can dissolve the apparent boundary between the self and the world, between one person and another, between humanity and the life that surrounds it and sustains it, but perhaps most importantly, between one nation and another. So, Ron, it is a pleasure and an honor to be with you in conversation. Perhaps you could begin by telling us about the overview effect and the orbital perspective. What's the relationship between these two, and above all, how you discovered it?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rupert. It's a pleasure. The honor is mine to be on this conversation. I've been looking forward to this discussion for a while. Thank you for the invitation. The overview effect. It is a term coined by Harvard professor Frank White in a book by the same name, The Overview Effect. He wrote it back in the 1980s after interviewing dozens of astronauts who had been to space. And basically, it's a shift. It's an awareness of the oneness of the universe. It's when you have the opportunity to see the planet from space and in space. There's a shift that can occur. That's not all astronauts communicate, but many do. It's an awareness that this idea that we're all in this together is not a cliche. It's the reality that each and every one of us is riding through the universe together on this spaceship that we call Earth, that we're all in space already. And so the orbital perspective is the other side of that coin. The orbital perspective is the call to action that comes from the overview effect. And actually, in the fourth edition of the book, The Overview Effect, I wrote the foreword to that book, and I describe in there I compare and contrast the overview effect with the orbital perspective. And so the call to action that comes from the overview effect, I dubbed the orbital perspective, which is the title of my first book. And it stems from a feeling of injustice. And when I looked at the planet from the vantage point of space, you're hit with just this indescribable beauty. And you're also hit, although I took me years to be able to put it into the words, is you're also hit with the unity that we as a species are called to. You're hit with the unity of all life on our planet, that we are one thing. And that we're traveling through the universe as one thing. We're not from Earth, we're of Earth. We are Earth. And that sense of injustice is you have that beauty and unity on one side, but on the other side, you feel the unfortunate realities of life on our planet for a significant number of its inhabitants. And the feeling of injustice is you realize it doesn't have to be this way. We have all the technology, we have all the resources necessary to solve many, if not all, the problems facing our planet. And you're faced with this dilemma of why do they still exist? Why do we still have all these problems? And the answer is, I think, because we as a whole, the vast majority of folks don't realize, well, I shouldn't say that. The vast majority of people in power don't realize that interconnectedness, that interdependency. They don't realize what happens on one side of the earth affects everything else. They don't realize how much um, we're connected in that way, and they operate from a siloed position, and build walls and artificial separation, and that's what's preventing us from solving the problems. That's what's preventing us from making life on our planet as beautiful as it looks from space.
Yes. Ron, it's so obvious for you, having had this experience, that the Earth is one. I presume you can't see boundaries between countries when you look at it from the moon. This is so obvious for you, um, but one doesn't have to go to the moon to realize that. Um, I'm sure that most, if not all, of our listeners now have the same feeling that that we share our being, that we are basically one. Um, it's once it's obvious, it it's so obvious. It's not. I was going to say it's not rocket science, but that's not a not the appropriate term. But it's so simple. It's so obvious. Once it's obvious, it's so obvious that we are not only one species, but that we are one with the animal world, the plant world, the earth, the universe. And yet, as you say, our culture, our world culture, is predicated on the uh, presumption of separation. So there is this disparity, as you say, between the unity of being, which once it is obvious, it is so obvious, and yet our culture is founded on the idea of separation, and that gives rise to, of course, all the conflicts and injustice and
Yeah.
everything. As you say, what do you how tell us about how you are. I know you're very active in the world. You're very passionate about. I was very struck by this when we first met at Garrison. I know you're very passionate about sharing this understanding. How do you feel this understanding could enter the mainstream more?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would take it one step further with the comment that you made. I think our culture is predicated on the preservation of separation. I think that's that there's a lot of organizations, there's a lot of people who personally benefit from that, from maintaining that separation. Um, just one quick correction: I didn't go to the moon. I went to low Earth orbit. The difference is I went 250 to an altitude of 250 miles. The moon is 250,000 miles. So, as you stated, you can't see borders from the moon, but you can see borders from low Earth orbit. As a matter of fact, I was really, really struck once when I saw this illuminated line snaking across a large landmass for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, and um, I didn't know what the line was, but it turns out it was the man-made illuminated border between India and Pakistan. And seeing that from space, seeing this scar on the otherwise beautiful landscape really did have an impact on me. It was a man-made barrier to collaboration, keeping creative problem-solving people on either side of that line from collaborating toward their shared challenges and problems and goals. And that's a perfect example of what we've been talking about how our structures are designed to keep us apart. Um, but your question is of the mainstream, and this perspective is so powerful, and it's so powerful, I think, in the problem solving process, because once there's no them anymore, when you only have us, the problem solving process becomes really clear. When you don't have to worry about who gets credit, then things really can accelerate. And so that perspective is so powerful that back in 2013, after my second mission, which was almost a 6-month mission, I decided to leave my dream job, to leave the job that I had worked 40 years to achieve, to be able to share that perspective unencumbered with through as many means possible. So I did leave NASA. I started writing books. I started doing podcasts. I started painting. I started making films. I did public speaking around the world. I still do. I started doing corporate consulting to try and steer organizations towards this bigger picture. And the other thing you mentioned is you don't have to go to space to have this perspective. That's why in my first book, The Orbital Perspective, the major tenet of that book is you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective. And so I spent a good deal of time in the book sharing stories of folks who exhibit the orbital perspective, who exhibit this call to action to solve the problems facing us in a unified, collaborative manner. So many people, stories were shared in that book that had never been to space, and so I agree 100% with that comment.
In a way, I think the recognition that you had is very close to the understanding in the Vedantic tradition about being the witness of your experience.
Mhm.
That normally we're so involved in the content of our experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and so on, and then that there is this stepping back, and you realize, oh, I'm not essentially the content of my experience. I am that which knows it.
Mhm.
And in a way, you're when I first when we first spoke about this, and that my first response to it was that you had a kind of visceral stepping back
Mhm.
fro- from from the earth, seeing it from space, and this in a way, in a way, it mirrors the understanding in the Vedantic tradition of standing as the witness of your experience. Of course, you were standing as the witness of the earth as opposed to your own thoughts and feelings, but there's a parallel there.
Mhm.
And I was struck in your in your opening words. You said, you spoke about seeing the Earth, not just from a location in outer space, but also seeing the Earth in space.
Mhm.
And again, there's a parallel in the Vedantic tradition that we are not just the witness of our experience, but the space-like presence of awareness within which the world appears. And you had that actual experience that the world appeared, that the totality of the world appeared in your awareness. So that was a kind of a visceral experience of your awareness encompassing the world. But
Exactly
it
right.
didn't come to you through an idea, or it was
Nope.
a primarily a visceral experience,
Exactly.
which you have now taken on. So, sorry, I interrupted.
No, no, no.
Go-
No, no, no. Uh, um, I'm agreeing with you. So yes, it's there's so many ways to describe this, but you brought out, that you're seeing that the planet hanging in the blackness of space. When you're on the daytime side of the orbit, and we go around the Earth every 90 minutes, so we see a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes. If you're on the dark side, then if your eyes adjust, you can see the stars. On the daytime side, the Earth shine, the reflection of the sun off the Earth is so bright that your eyes uh, can adapt in a way that you can see the stars. So you just see this glowing, iridescent, biosphere um, against the backdrop of this just inky black nothingness, and that is a really really powerful vision. And so the detachment from it, I think, is really really the key thing, the physical detachment. And so, when I looked out the window for the first time when I was in space, for the first time in my life, I saw our planet with me not on it. I mean, I saw the planet from a different perspective. And the way I describe it is, imagine, we could be moved by awe and wonder, through anything, through a beautiful sunset, on a beach, or, sitting at the edge of the Grand Canyon. But in both of those scenes, gravity is pushing us down into that scene. We are within the frame of the masterpiece, right? And for the first time when I was in space, I was outside the frame of the masterpiece. I was outside looking in, and it is very parallel to meditation, because in meditation we're trying to get outside of our thoughts, and I was physically outside of everything I had ever known. There was no requirement for me to do anything. It was just a physical fact. that it was a physical meditation, if you will, that I was outside what I was observing, without question. The other thing is I'm floating, right? So I'm I'm in this, cupola, this windowed observatory with almost a 180-degree view around. You can see the curvature of the Earth. You can see the incredible thinness, the glowing thinness of the atmosphere, and you're just struck by this incredible beauty. But you're outside of it, and as you pointed out, that's such a key part of it, and it's something that I really couldn't put into words. And um, what I felt in that moment was just an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the opportunity to see the planet from that vantage point, and gratitude for the planet that we've been given, the planet that we have, the planet that we are, and in some way that I'm still years later trying to put into words, and it's taken me 4 books now, is being physically detached from the world made me feel deeply not only interconnected but deeply interdependent with everything and with everyone and everything on it. It was just an extremely moving experience.
Yes, yes. You describe it beautifully, and I can't help but keep making parallels with the non-dual understanding. Um, your description of both being outside the, the world, but knowing that you are also a participant in it.
Mhm,
So a little bit like um, a dream that we have at night. At night, when we dream at night, we dream the entire dream world within our own mind. But at the same time, we localize ourselves as a perspective within our own dream. So we take we are both outside the time and space that seem to exist within the dream, and we are a participant in the time and space. So you're both the universal and the individual, both the infinite and the finite. And we are in ordinary everyday life, and this is really the heart of the non-dual understanding. We are both the whole, the
mhm,
infinite, and at the same time a localized perspective within it.
mhm,
And I was very struck by again, you had a kind of visceral experience of that,
mhm.
possibly before it came to you philosophically.
Oh, certainly. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly. It's taken me years to unpack it, years to integrate what I experienced. And my first mission was a 2-week mission, and it was very, very busy. I did 3 spacewalks on that mission. We were basically helping to build the International Space Station. We brought up and installed the Japanese laboratory to the space station. But it was a profound experience. My second mission was almost 6 months long, and it was more of a marathon than a sprint, and I did have more time for reflection and more time to try and take it all in and process it. And but still, I'm still processing.
Yes. Yes. One of the one of the things that struck me, I don't remember the details. It was just something short that I read about you was the collaboration with the Russians
Mhm,
on one of your trips. The Russians were obviously in quotes the enemy,
mhm,
but at the same time you were um, collaborating and cooperating with them. And this, I thought that was just such an amazing example of one of the inevitable consequences of this recognition of the unity of being. That
mhm.
the conflict always comes from the assumption of separation, and that how incredibly unifying the fact that you were working together with the Russians on this. I was very touched by that. Can t- tell us more about that?
Yes, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what, country, your citizenship is with. Everybody I know that has gone to space has had the same feeling, the same unifying feeling. And I had very, very deep conversations with my Russian crewmates. I had, you know, crewmates from other nations, Japan and Italy, and everybody. I even interviewed, did video interviews with folks, and asked them questions like you're asking me right now. And it's interesting that in my 6 months in space, with all the folks I've been in space with, I don't remember ever having a discussion about politics. And it wasn't that it was off limits; it was that it was irrelevant. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's what those people down there do. And you have to realize that I spent the first 15 years of my adult life training to fight the Russians. I was a Cold War fighter pilot stationed on the tip of the sword in the former West Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall. I fought in combat in another part of the world, and so I'm coming into this as with a military background, and I was taught that the Russians were our enemies, and the 15 years later, I find myself at the base of a rocket at a previous top secret Soviet military installation, getting ready to launch into space with two Russian military officers. And by the way, it was on the 50th anniversary of the first space flight of Yuri Gagarin, and we were launching from the same launch pad that he launched from on a spacecraft called Gagarin. And that was surreal to me. Besides the fact that I'm going to space for 6 months, just the fact that I was there in Russia it was Kazakhstan actually, but former Soviet Union, um, with these Russian military officers. And, you know, all of those artificial walls and barriers and boundaries just dissolve. I mean, we're just people. We're just people sharing a really incredible, awe-inspiring experience together. And, you really learn that everybody's the same. Everybody has the same hopes and dreams. They want their families to be okay. They want the world to be a better place, and it really gives you hope in humanity.
Yeah. Are you in touch with them still? Do you keep in touch with them?
I do, not as much. I mean, things are pretty complicated right now with Ukraine and
Yeah,
everything.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But what's interesting about Ukraine is just despite everything that has happened and is happening in Ukraine, there still remains cooperation in space. And what's interesting about that, back in the early 90s, if I could digress for a second, there was a lot of conversations about should we allow the Russians to come into the ISS program, into the International Space Station program. And there were a lot of detractors that said, no, the Russians are doing X, Y, and Z. Until they stop doing X, Y, and Z, we should have nothing to do with them. Those voices didn't win out, luckily, because had we not brought the Russians into the space station program, we wouldn't have a space station right now. After the Columbia disaster, the only way to get to the space station was on a Russian Soyuz spacecraft, because the Dragon, the SpaceX Dragon wasn't developed yet, and so we would have probably just deorbited the space station, and so we were able to do that. And what that showed us is that the normal way of doing business is to find something that we agree on and use that as a stick to force what we don't agree on. And that just never works. But what we did in this case is we found something we agreed on, space exploration, and we agreed to work on that. And because we did that, certain relationships develop, a certain foundation of trust develops. And now we can and are using this foundation of trust as a jump off point to start to address the things that we don't agree on, like Ukraine, like the situation there in the war. And so it keeps dialogues open, it keeps discussions open, it helps to prevent walls from being built and silos to being erected. And I think it's a really powerful way to do business.
Again, that's a beautiful reflection in society of the kind of founding principle of the non-dual understanding, namely that we all start, that the primary experience of everybody is the experience of their own being, the awareness of being. That is our primary experience, the experience to which we refer when we say "I am." And when anybody, irrespective of their race, their creed, their culture, that when anybody says "I am," they refer to the same essential being. That's really the founding principle of the non-dual understanding. At the deepest level, we are identical. And in a way, what you're describing is an application of that principle in relationship to specific projects and cooperation based on that fundamental understanding, rather than, as you say, based on a disagreement, and then trying to bring two competing parties to agree.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I agree 100% from experience.
Ron, tell us more about your. I know you started an institution or a program. I heard you describing. What's the organization that you started to implement this understanding in the world?
So I've been involved with the formation of many organizations that run the spectrum of flavors, if you will, from traditional businesses to social businesses, which exist to create an environmental or social good in the world, that are non-dividend companies. All profits go back into the good that it's creating, to nonprofits. Initially, I was very involved with water, uh, providing clean water in the world through Mana Energy Foundation, which has evolved into a social enterprise incubator that incubated a number of different social businesses that are doing great work in the world. Um, I'm also involved in the U.S. with an organization called Astronauts for America. We've brought together over 100 former NASA astronauts to come together to advocate for constitutional norms, rule of law, science, evidence-based decision making.
That was the institution. That's the one I was referring to.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so that just launched about 3 months ago, I want to say, and it's in its infancy, but it's in response to a decades long erosion of rights in the U.S. of following the Constitution. It turns out that the founding fathers of America kind of knew what they were doing, and they were able to see the future and put a lot of things in place that we shouldn't ignore, like like basic rights of folks. And so it's interesting. The one of the reasons why we do it is because well, we all swore an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States, but beyond that, we all come from different backgrounds, different, in some cases, nations, ethnicities, religions, but we all work together seamlessly to accomplish a mission. And our slogan is "Our country is the mission." And we use fact-based, evidence-based decision making in everything that we do. We get the data, and we make the best choices possible based on the data, not based on our opinions. And move forward. And we see a lack of that in the U.S. right now. And it's really an opinion based. And really, the reason why it's an opinion based is because it's fear based. So we, not only as a nation but as a world, have really shifted to a fear based mentality. And what that does is it closes the mind off. It erects barriers to collaboration. It creates a situation where a difference of perspective or opinion is seen as something to defend against. And so each of us comes at things from a different perspective. And when we see things from more than one perspective, we start to see it in stereoscopic vision. We start to see the depth of the situation. Um, so we have a situation right now in the country and in the world where we're not allowing all the pieces of the puzzle onto the board. And so we're not going to solve the problems we face until we set aside fear. And that's what we did to build the ISS. We didn't set aside our differences. We set aside fear. We brought our differences with us because our differences are a strength. And what we did do is embrace the awe and wonder of space exploration. And that enabled us to build the most complicated, complex structure ever built and build it in space. with nations that, were on opposite sides of the Cold War, opposite sides of the space race, some that fought wars against each other. But because we were able to set aside fear and embrace awe and wonder, we were able to do that. And I've seen it firsthand over and over again. When we start a conversation on the basis of awe and wonder, the mind opens up. The defenses go down. We can have rational conversations about, hot button issues. But there's so little of that right now in the public dialogue because everything seems to be fear-based.
Yes. I mean, fear, both at an individual and a universal scale, fear is the inevitable consequence of the presumption of separation. It's its natural expression, whereas love is the inevitable consequence of the unity of being. But by love, I mean the recognition of our shared being. It's just the natural extension of the understanding of the unity of being, the oneness of all life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And everybody at some level, maybe they don't understand that, but they can feel it, and they know what it feels like, and that's where the defenses go down, and the collaboration can seep in.
Yes, every single person in the world knows what the experience of love is, but for most people, our circle of love, we feel the unity of being with a relatively small number of people, our nearest and dearest. Whereas, in fact, we don't just share our being with our nearest and dearest. We share our being with everyone, even those we disagree with. And it doesn't necessarily imply that we agree with everybody, but it does imply cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And the dissolution of conflict. And it's what you're saying. It reminds me the Irish poet W.B. Yeats. There are no strangers here, only friends we haven't yet met.
Exactly.
The whole world, everyone is. We just haven't yet realized that everyone is our friend. Everyone is a friend.
It's easy to realize that when you're immersed in awe and wonder. It becomes obvious.
Yes.
And again, you don't have to go to space to be immersed in awe and wonder.
You can have the same experience watching a bird fly through the sky. I mean, what was it, Einstein? If anything is a miracle, everything is a miracle. It's the same. Exactly. But most of us need some powerful experience to make that more than just an idea, but really make that understanding visceral.
Exactly.
Anything else, Ron, you'd like to share with us about your own?
Well, I remember telling you in Garrison that I have a document that I've been keeping for 5 years called Questions for Rupert. So I could open those up and no, but what I would share is, like I said, I want to share this perspective in every medium possible, and I'm doing that. And so what I'm working on right now is my first fiction novel, and it's called Infinite Simplicity, and it's basically, in a nutshell, non-duality packaged as a science fiction novel. And so the reason why I wanted to do it that way is because you can reach different people through different ways. And what I found is in a fiction setting, there's a lot more freedom to work concepts in a way that touches the heart. You know, and I think there will be a lot of readers that understand intellectually the non-duality of the novel, but I think there'll be other readers that understand it emotionally or viscerally. And we're on Substack right now. I've released the first 5 chapters already on my Substack, and I'm going to continue to release them. And it's free because I just want to get this message that you are so gifted at sharing out to the world as well.
What I think it was what struck me so much when we first met and had this conversation is that the 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 path of reason, the intellectual path, and the path of devotion. These are two paths that are very well documented in the spiritual traditions. Most spiritual traditions are express this unity of being through one of these two approaches, the way of the intellect and the way of the heart. But you came to this first of all through perception, and in a way that's what an artist does. An artist uses perception to bring this understanding. But that's what struck me so much about your experience is that it was the perception of the world that first triggered this recognition in you, which you've then gone on to kind of take into yourself very, very deeply, and now expressing it in all sorts of ways, intellectually, and as you say in your book, trying to touch people's hearts. But that you came to this and this image of Earthrise, which must be, well, probably the most iconic image of the last century. I had it hanging on my walls for years. This recognition that you came to first of all through perception.
Yeah, which is surprising because I'm not normally that way. I'm very analytical, and I usually have to understand it intellectually first, and then have the rest of me catch up. But this was definitely the opposite. I'm still trying to catch up to the perspective or the perception part right now. I'm still trying to reduce it to something that I could put into words, to put it differently. And you brought up an interesting thing before. You talked about how we're not only a part, we're a whole. We're the whole, right? And I know there's a lot of folks who talk in those terms of holons, and that there are no parts and there are no wholes. There's only holons, which means that there's only things that are both part and both whole. There's the ocean and the drop, and all those analogies. And one way that I try and put that into a concrete way that we can use in our everyday life is something that I call a dolly zoom, which is a term that I borrowed from cinematography. And in cinematography, a dolly zoom is where the camera is rolled back or dollied back at the same rate, at the same time as it's zoomed in. And it's been used in Jaws and Vertigo and a lot of different movies. And the directors use it because it serves to heighten the experience. It serves to give altitude to a scene, to challenge the viewer's view of reality, and it puts them into kind of a otherworldly type of setting. But we could also dolly zoom a situation or a problem or a challenge, and if we do that, that means that we zoom out to the widest spatial view we can, the widest geographic view. Ideally, zoom out so we see the whole planet. But as we zoom out, we don't lose the worm's eye details on the ground. We don't zoom out to the point where people become numbers on a spreadsheet or a voting block or a consumer group. They maintain their importance as valued members of our family. There's also a spatial, a temporal aspect of it, in that we zoom out to the longest time frame possible, hopefully multi-generational. But as we do that, we can't lose sight of the short term, because right now we as a society are overly focused on the short term. Nothing is more important than the next shareholder report, the next earnings report, the next election cycle. We can't lose sight of that. They are important, but we can't focus exclusively on that either. We have to think of the next generations. And then the last aspect of a dolly zoom came to me when I was on a spacewalk. And when I was on a spacewalk, I realized that my perspective was changing by 5 miles a second. And so every second I'm seeing, something 5 miles different. And what dawned on me is, like I said before, seeing things from more than one perspective creates stereoscopic vision. You start to see the depth. And so we often hear that diversity is strength, and one of the reasons why diversity is strength is because it leads to diversity of perspective. So the more perspectives we apply to the problem, the deeper will be our understanding of it, and the better and longer lasting will be the solutions of it. And so I use all that from a business point of view, from a day-to-day point of view, but there's also deeply spiritual aspects of all of that in the the ocean and the drop in the ocean, and all of the things I've heard you speak about, with coming reconcile the reality that we are both the whole and the part. This is just my way to kind of you know shrink that down into something that we could use in our day-to-day lives. And the going back to the perspective piece of it, why that's so important is because we do live in a society where a difference of perspective is seen as something to defend against, and that's what's really, really holding us back as a species.
Yes, 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 yes. We're both the whole and in our, the deepest part of ourselves. We're the whole, but we're also the localized perspective within it. And as that localized perspective, as the individual, um, whether we spend our life in service of the whole or in service of the individual, is really the fundamental, that which of those two premises we you, is really the fundamental idea behind everything we do, as an individual, as a localized perspective of the whole within the whole. What's the on whose behalf do we think and feel and act and relate? Is it on behalf of the whole? Is our life's work to bring the qualities that are inherent in the whole into society, or do we work on behalf of the individual? That's the kind of fundamental question that really determines how we live our life, the work we do, everything.
Yeah, and I think the other tenet of the dolly zoom concept is that you don't really have to choose, because you can serve the whole by serving the individual, and vice versa. And it's you, there's a way through integration to 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 do both, because in reality they're both the same thing. So
Yes, yes. We could talk we could talk all day easily. It's so inspiring talking with you, hearing your story, what you're doing in the world as a result of this. It's just such a beautiful example of not only having this understanding of the unity of being, that's one thing, but also how that is manifest, how you live that understanding in the world, what you do with it. And it's really so inspiring to hear what you're doing. And
well, thank you, Rupert, and thank you so much for all the light that you bring into the world. Thank you for everything you've done for me, specifically helping me unpack this incredible experiences that I've had, um, that I could never put into words. But I've never met anybody who has a better ability to take the unexplainable and explain it in words that evoke what can't be explained with words. So I think you do a great job, and you have the patience to walk people to their own conclusions. You've done that with me, and I really appreciate it, because, as you know, when folks come to their own conclusion, it's going to stick. It's going to be more powerful than just being told. And so,
yeah,
I really appreciate you sharing that gift with the world, of that patience and that insight and that empathy to be able to, like I said, communicate that which cannot be communicated. So
thank you, Ron. Ron, if people want to know more about you, how long till what stage is your book at? Is it imminent, or
the book is the manuscript is complete. Like I
okay,
said, I'm releasing chapters on Substack. I'm in the process right now of just deciding how it's going to be published. I haven't decided that yet. I'm putting on Substack because I genuinely want feedback. I want people to let me know what's landing, what's not landing. I really want this to be a collaborative effort of getting this story about non-duality out into the world, out into the world in a way through a mechanism that hopefully will reach people that normally wouldn't hear that message. Um, and so, yeah, you can find me on Substack. I invite folks to come visit through my website, Ron Garan, rongaran.com. And there's lots of other avenues there. And yeah, I just love to keep the conversation going with everybody.
Lovely. Well, Ron, as I said at the beginning, it's really it's a pleasure, but more than that, it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you for joining us, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rupert, and all the best to Kira.
Certainly, for sure. Yeah. Okay. And everybody who's joined us, I can see on the right here, lots of people have joined, and lovely comments, and so thank you everyone for joining us. I'm glad so many of you could join. Bye for now. Bye bye.
Thanks, Rupert.